remember in the beginning of this project, we were actually quite concerned that maybe that wasn't the case. And so as part of the initiation of this Innovation for Sustainability Network, we did some analysis of concepts related to sustainable development. And we did this by looking, well, first thing that we did was we looked at the literature and tried to develop a taxonomy of different concepts that were related to sustainable development. This is a picture describing that. So there are some broad economy-wide sustainable development strategies that we see in use, and sort of superordinate to those, there are political objectives. What do governments and polities want to achieve via sustainable development? And then even higher level than that, what are the ideologies underlying their political objectives, and what are the framings they use when they think about these things? Below the strategy level, we have, okay, what are the processes for change that they hope that sustainable development will go through? Will the economy become more efficient, more innovative? What are the processes that different countries and different actors want to emphasize? What are the domains for action, sectors or parts of society, scales and dimensions as well? So we developed quite a big taxonomy under each of these. We've identified, between 15 and 30 different concepts that were in fairly wide use. And what we did was to look at the sort of political and strategic level, look at selection of countries and international organizations, and try to see whether we can learn something about their different uses of concepts, and whether there might be meaningful lessons in there. So just to show you the colorful result of that. This is the connection of political objectives to different countries. This isn't the complete country list, it's developed since then, but so we sort of ran through this process of looking at the thickness of the line is supposed to be how strongly it's prioritized by different countries. So we did this for all objectives, all the different domains of society, and tried to come to some conclusions about whether these differences or similarities could be taken as meaningful or important. I think we did come to some. I'm not going to review the entire process, but what I wanted to talk about a little bit was talk about what we saw in the African context. There were a handful of African countries included in the review. Also looked at the African Union's statement, or the Agenda 2063. We were looking at national development plans, visions, things like that. And the first thing to say is that, repeating what's been said by speakers previously, the diversity within the African countries was basically as great as the diversity between African countries and the rest of the world. And actually that wasn't even only true of Africa. The same thing could be said within European countries. They were no more similar to each other than they were to the rest of the world in terms of their conceptualization of sustainable development. And in fact, the two, by far the strongest country-to-country link in terms of consistent use of concepts was Germany and Brazil. So there wasn't really even a way to simplify it along the lines of economic development stage. And interestingly, Germany and Brazil have developed some collaborations on sustainable development and climate action, and I think that they've discovered a little bit of these similarities. In the African context, if there were any similarities across the countries and institutions we looked at, you might see them in this word cloud. The bigger words were more important.
Important or more often?
No, more important. So this is a qualitative ranking of how high these priorities were, how highly prioritized these things were in the strategies, in the strategy documents. So this isn't just a pure word count. And this would look different for different regions of the world. Probably something that isn't surprising is that agriculture was a big part of sustainable development planning. What was a little bit more surprising to me was how consistent the emphasis on education was compared to in other countries where education playing a key enabling role in sustainable development, not all that commonly expressed globally, but very common in the African context. So there may be some lessons to learn there. I don't know that I can draw any hard and fast conclusions. One thing worth noting is that South Africa was one of the countries we looked at. South Africa has, of course, had an outsized role in the global sustainable development dialogues and processes, so that South Africa was actually notably more similar to international institutions than to other African countries. So that could be something of interest. One thing that we don't see in any of the African documents that we looked at was transition thinking. And so just to bring it back to what we want to discuss today, I would argue that at this level, in terms of developing long-term visions for sustainable development and priorities for sustainable development, that transition thinking has not penetrated the upper political dialogues, with the possible exception in South Africa a little bit, but it's not particularly visible here. And I don't have I have a hypothesis. One thing that we did see very prominently here was a focus on governance in all the African documents. And I think the transition thinking is about governance. It's about developing governance models that promote disruption and change. And in these documents that I've read, the emphasis is on governance models that promote stability. Quite the opposite, that what we need is governance for stability and reliability, accountability, transparency. And that doesn't mean that those two goals are fundamentally in conflict, but it may be sort of conceptually squeezing out transition thinking to a certain extent. That's all I wanted to present, and maybe that is just sort of something to keep in the back of your mind in terms of the way these concepts are used in Africa versus the rest of the world.